for a discussion on the impact of the pandemic on manufacturing strategies. I'm joined by John Caltabiano. He is Vice President of Supply Chain with Jabil. Hello, John.
Hi, Bob. How are you?
I'm good. So tell me about this survey of supply chain professionals that Jabil conducted with Dimensional Research.
We've conducted surveys over the last couple of years to really measure kind of what's going on in the markets and with our own profession in terms of supply chain strategy. The most recent survey was a follow-up to a survey we did approximately a year ago. And that survey was really looking at supply chain resilience. This survey, obviously with the backdrop of COVID-19, was done really to try to take a look at supply chain resilience now with the backdrop of the COVID-19 supply chain disruption.
So what kind of companies are you surveying? Are they supply chain professionals with your customer base? Are they outside of that? Or who are these people?
They're supply chain professionals in the general marketplace, both our customers and also companies that are in the same markets that we serve.
Okay. Well, as you point out, things are quite different today than they were a year ago. So I'm sure that the survey yielded some quite different results. What takeaways did it offer to manufacturers from managing their supply chains in the pandemic?
Well, I think there were quite a few takeaways, but I think there were three main takeaways that were really important for us as well as for all supply chain professionals. Number one, the importance of supply chain resilience. I think we've all talked about it. We kind of, used the theories of, how do you respond to disruptions? But this disruption was so significant that it really raised the level of everybody's awareness of supply chain resilience. I think the second thing that it pointed out were that many companies were actually pretty well prepared to deal with this disruption. Many of the investments companies had made over the last couple of years really paid dividends in terms of technology investments, in terms of working on their supply chain, in terms of being responsive. So it was very interesting to see the high percentage of companies that responded that said, yes, our investments were really key to how we were able to respond to the disruption. And then I think the third thing was kind of the emphasis on why continuing to go in this path of investing in not just the technology, but also in the processes and in your own company's expertise in managing the elements of supply chain resilience. It was very clear that even though companies said, well, I did a pretty good job and my investments were really important, I still need to do more. And I think the depth of this disruption really stress tested everybody's supply chains to the point that it emphasized the importance of not only just the investments that have made to date, but the importance of the ongoing strategic investments companies had.
Yeah. It's interesting you should say that so many of these companies, or at least a portion of these companies, were well prepared, because the scale of this disruption was unprecedented, at least in modern memory. You're saying they were actually prepared for something of global scope?
Yeah, I wouldn't, I have to use the words carefully prepared. In the survey, it was about almost 50% said that the investments they had made allowed their time to recover to this disruption. It made it less impactful than they had thought it was going to be. So I think the fact that people were talking about this before and were investing in it really, I think was quite striking, because again, we've talked about it, but many companies, a very small percentage, said they hadn't done anything. So I think that's kind of the key here. It's all the orders of magnitude. But I know from our perspective, we've made a lot of investments. It wasn't always for, hey, I'm going to deal with a COVID-19 disruption. It was more investments in visibility, investments in analytics capabilities, investments in our core supply chain strategies of where our suppliers are, where our factories are. And I think those are things that companies realize, hey, some of these things are really important and I need to do more.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you kind of started to answer my next question, and that is what form is resilience taking in these organizations? What types of things are they adopting? You talked about visibility, you talked about analytics. Did it have to do with changing sourcing patterns, sourcing strategies, diversifying supplier bases, anything like that? Or was it more of a technological play that these companies achieved in preparing for this disruption?
Yeah, I think it was really a combination of the things you talk about. In the survey, we asked people, asked companies to talk about their technology investments. So certainly technology is at the core of a company's capability to have visibility across all the nodes of their supply chain. So that's obviously very, very important. I think the second piece of this is the analytics part of it, which is we asked companies to really and what do you do with your data, and do you have the ability to manage what that data tells you? So predictive analytics as an example. And then I think the last thing is you got to take action. The activities of developing second sources, the activities of changing who your suppliers are, or even the locations of your factories in order to allow for this idea of time to recover, to shorten that time, has really become a very important factor. And I say the last piece of this is, everybody designed their supply chains around this idea of low cost. And now you hear a lot of discussions, and it came out really clearly in the survey that we were really talking about where these sources of supply were going to be taking place. And I think that's really, really important. And
Yeah.
And the reality of it is that the methods and time to recover your supply is really become really important.
Yeah. Hey, don't worry about the dog, by the way, John. It's a common feature of these Zoom videos these
Yeah,
days.
yeah, we did try to deal with that. I apologize.
Don't. So it spices up the conversation a little bit. So
For
no
sure.
problems there whatsoever. Okay, so companies had warning signs before the pandemic. They had floods, they had tsunamis, they had earthquakes, nuclear disasters, and volcanoes, and the like. Were those enough to prepare them, or was it like only now they go, oh yeah? I mean, the ones that had not responded to those lessons before are taking it serious now.
I think that's a really good perspective. I believe, and I think it came out in the survey, as I said before, what a large percentage of companies said they were making investments in what I would call the elements, the core elements of having a resilient supply chain. They talked about it, they were strategizing about it. We, at Jabil, we were talking about it. Many of our customers are talking about it. So everybody understood it. I don't think anybody, including myself, and I've been around for a long time, ever thought we would see something like this.
Yeah.
I think what it did was stress test people's idea of resilience. And a lot of companies who had supply chains, for example, in low-cost countries that were very far from their markets, had a really difficult time responding because the length of time was so long and their ability to understand what's going on. So I think the reaction to this event is going to be pretty significant. And I think that came out in the survey that people talked about, are you going to continue to invest? Are you going to continue down the path you've chosen of making your supply chain more resilient? And the majority of the respondents came back overwhelmingly, and said, no, this is really, really important. So I think we learned things, the tsunami, then the Thailand flood, then the component shortages that we had, all were pieces of the puzzle. This last very, very disruptive event, I think, is going to change the landscape of how supply chain professionals talk about resilience. Because as I said before, we like to talk about low cost supply chains. And now low cost may not be resilient. And now we have to marry those two together, where we say, look, we have to have a responsive supply chain, a flexible supply chain. It has to be cost effective, but not necessarily low cost at the expense of resilience.
Now, we know that changes in sourcing patterns do not happen overnight. They are a commitment of time and resources, and it's a long-term play. That being the case, are you seeing companies seriously changing their sourcing patterns? Are they reshoring? For instance, are they shifting at least some capacity out of China back to this hemisphere, other parts of Asia? Are there these serious plans afoot as a result of what we've seen this year?
Yeah, I think the answer is kind of a nuanced answer to it because we had the trade and tariff pressures of last year. So
Mhm.
you think about 2019 and the trade and tariff pressures of everyone who was building product in China, as an example, where they were under tremendous tariff pressure and started moving product out of China to avoid the tariffs. That in and of itself was the underlying kind of activity going on right as we're going into 2020, February, March, we have the COVID-19 pandemic. So you have this large transitioning going on of people moving their supply chains because of the trade and tariff problems, because of cost, because increasing labor costs, currency fluctuations, supply continuity, and in terms of, hey, I need my factories closer to the markets, and then you layer on top of this the COVID-19 kind of conditions we saw this year. Nobody's moving today. I mean, that takes a while for companies to make these decisions, but I would expect this kind of be a tipping point for companies to really start to change their patterns of sourcing, to change their patterns of how they design their supply chains, and to change their view of where to build their products in relation to where their markets are.
What does that mean for Jabil? It must mean that
Well,
you have to disperse your resources and concentrate your resources in a different way. Are you undertaking such changes in response?
yeah, I think it's a really good kind of lesson for us as a company. We are a global manufacturing company, and I think we have many people in our industry who are similarly located. We have factories all over the world, and we always say that well, we go where our customers tell us to go, but at the same time, our customers expect us to be in places that allow them to leverage their supply chain strategy. So I think the things that are happening with us because of this really are the same things, that trends that we saw in 2019 and 2018 with the trade and tariff issues, with the cost increases in China, with the logistics challenges of moving product long distances and responding to market dynamics. So there was a trend already of companies really relocating their manufacturing footprint. And I think this is another example why having global manufacturing contract partners really is a good leverage point for many companies, because we already have the assets in place. And our challenge is always, we have to be one step ahead of our customers to have the infrastructure, people, processes ready to go because they want to move fast. And I think that's the big lesson for us is, again, we have the capability to do that, but moving fast with speed, with the right intelligence about how to set up the supply chain is still a big challenge for us.
Yeah. So while these trends aren't exactly new, they certainly are more intense, and it sounds like some important lessons have been learned that will really permanently affect manufacturing strategies going forward. John Caltabiano of Jabil, thank you so much for helping us understand what some of those strategies and concerns and lessons are. Really appreciate your being with me today.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it.